make a unanimous consent request in a moment. And I am so anxious to, I've got a number of my Republican colleagues. I remember being in middle school as well. You don't want to be the first, but you don't want to be the last. Unfortunately, that's where we rank right now in terms of comparison to the OECD in terms of raising corporate revenue. I don't think that's fair to hardworking Americans. And the ranking member on the Senate Finance Committee is someone that I have huge, huge respect for and have worked with on many, many items. And we're going to have a chance to debate part of these components, I think, going forward. But I would say this, because when I first got to know well the senator from Idaho, it was one of my first times I was a gang member. And the senator from Idaho and I, part of something called the Gang of Six, and we were audacious enough to think that a proposal put forward by the so-called Simpson-Bowles Commission to take on the debt and deficit issues in our country was worthwhile and worth us both, frankly, offending folks in each of our respective parties. We were astonished that at 2010-11 timeframe, the country was looking at $15 trillion of debt. We obviously were not very successful, since we're now at about $27 trillion in debt. And I would argue both sides bear lots of responsibility. We, I believe, cut revenues way too much. In the last year or so alone, we've jointly added $5 trillion plus in terms of spending around COVID. But the one thing I think we both realized was what we shouldn't do is ever mess with the full faith and credit of the United States of America. Because that's like giving a politician, an irresponsible politician, a hand grenade and saying, let that politician pull the pin out at any moment in time. Well, there may be some folks now that are prepared to pull the pin out and put in jeopardy the full faith and credit of the United States of America. If that happens over the next 30 days, the one thing that we can be guaranteed is it will rock the bond markets. It will rock how America views, how the rest of the world views America's ability to honor its commitments. I fear, as somebody, and again, my friend from Idaho, I know realizes this as well, is that we mess with this. If we were to pull that hand grenade and have it explode on all of us, American people aren't going to decide whose fault it was or whose responsibility it was. All they're going to end up seeing, I believe, is that interest rates are going to go up. And because we've not dealt with the debt and deficit at $27 trillion, if interest rates go up 100 basis points, 1%, that is the equivalent of call it a tax or spending obligation of $200 billion a year of additional interest payments. And those interest payments come before Medicare, come before Social Security, come before payment to our soldiers. So I know we are rallying against spending, but let's make sure, and we both ought to bear some responsibility on this, we don't mess with the full faith and credit of the United States, because we do that, in addition to all the things that you're making criticisms of this reconciliation plan, you've just added another $2 trillion of spending, mandatory spending, over the next decade. So we can agree or disagree on the reconciliation pieces and what parts, but let's guarantee one way or the other we don't mess with the full faith and credit of the United States. And I thank my good friend from Idaho and all the good work that we've done together and will continue to do together. And I'm anxious to come back and, some parts of your critique I agree with, many I don't. But I know I'm holding up also my colleague and friend from the Intelligence Committee, the senator from Texas. So, Mr. President, I rise today to seek unanimous consent to confirm Mr. Matthew G. Olson, President Biden's nominee, to be the next Assistant Attorney General for National Security Division at the Department of Justice. Mr. President, as we all know, America recently marked the 20th anniversary of one of the darkest days in our history, the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. As chairman of the Intelligence Committee, I'm privy to the intelligence information being collected from across our IC community, which sets forth the myriad threats our nation continues to face, both at home and abroad. And the senator from Texas, who was a great member of the Intelligence committee is aware of those threats as well. Our ability to counter these threats and ensure our national security is dependent on having qualified individuals nominated by the President in place so they can do their jobs and, importantly, be held accountable through the confirmation process. Prior to the attacks of 9/11, and this was one of the things that were pointed out by the commission afterwards, literally 57% of the federal government's Senate-confirmed top national security jobs remained vacant. 57%. And one of the key recommendations of the 9/11 Commission was to accelerate the process of national security appointments. Unfortunately, if we fast forward 20 years, Mr. President, today, you'd think we'd learned the lesson, but today the situation is actually worse than it was prior to 9/11. Of the 170 confirmable national security-related positions, only 44 have been filled. That's just 26%. You know, my math shows that means we've got about 74% that are unfilled. We got to do better. That's why it is essential for the Senate to swiftly confirm every single qualified national security and intelligence professional whose nomination is pending on the Senate floor. That's why I strongly support the swift confirmation of Matt Olsen. The National Security Division, or NSD, at the DOJ has remained without a confirmed senior leader for several months. Created in 2006, the NSD consolidates the department's primary national security operations and serves as a key link between the department and the intelligence community. Its mission is to carry out the department's highest priority, protecting the United States from threats to our national security by pursuing justice through law. And Mr. President, Matt Olsen is eminently qualified for this position, given his years of service at the DOJ, as General Counsel for the NSA, and as Director of the National Counterterrorism Center, or NCTC, in which capacity he regularly briefed our Intelligence Committee. Matt is a consummate intelligence professional and an effective leader of the highest caliber and personal and professional integrity. The NSD needs a confirmed leader in place. So I'm urging my colleagues to confirm Matt Olsen immediately. So, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to consideration of the following nomination. Calendar number 347, Matthew G. Olsen of Maryland to be an Assistant Attorney General, that the nomination be confirmed, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, that no further motions be in order to the nomination, and that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. It's ironic that I come to the floor to be with my friend, the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, with whom I proudly serve and with whom I have worked on many different projects within the intelligence community and the jurisdiction of that committee. But this is one where we clearly see things differently. Mr. Olsen, for most of his career, and it has been a distinguished career, has operated as a nonpartisan public servant. But as Senator Grassley, ranking member on the Judiciary Committee, said at the time he had his hearing there, once the previous administration took office, it was like a switch got flipped, and he turned into a partisan warrior. Over the last few years, Mr. Olsen has made a series of ultra-partisan statements. Prior to the 2016 election, he said that ISIS supported Donald Trump for president. Following the election, he claimed that the Electoral College should be abolished because it's a national security threat. He signed onto a number of letters hysterically criticizing then Attorney General Barr and the Justice Department. And he failed to disclose these writings and other critical information to the Judiciary Committee during the hearing on his nomination. I believe now more than ever it's absolutely critical that the Justice Department and our intelligence community operate free from political influence and bias. But I have no confidence that have confirmed Mr. Olson's partisan switch will get flipped back off. I fear he'll continue to pursue his political objectives from within the department, using the powerful tools of the Department of Justice to pave the way for his partisan political agenda. And Mr. President, lest anybody think these concerns are unprecedented or groundless, let me just point out that we now have a former lawyer with the FBI that has pled guilty to falsifying an application to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court in the process of investigating an American citizen. He's now pled guilty and is now serving probation, a lawyer with the FBI who erroneously communicated information to the court with which they relied upon to issue a warrant to surveil an American citizen using the powers of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. And then just recently, just this last week, another lawyer has been indicted by Mr. Durham, the special counsel, somebody who has a distinguished career as a former federal prosecutor, has worked at a prominent firm that typically represents the Democratic Party. He now has been indicted for lying to the FBI, and arises out of a conversation he had with the general counsel at the FBI, suggesting that there was some link between the Trump administration or Trump organization and a Kremlin-linked Russian lender called Alpha Bank. The indictment says that Mr. Sussman, Michael Sussman, lied about the capacity in which he was providing this information to the FBI. But in fact, what he did is prepare white papers and other information using confidential information obtained from a technology client and fed that to the FBI while he claimed to be just a good citizen wanting to pass this information along when he was actually on the payroll of the Clinton campaign. And obviously then talking to the press, leaking this narrative to the press, this has, I think, contributed to this false narrative of somehow that the Russians colluded with then candidate Trump in order to win the election. There's been no evidence at all, whether you look at the Inspector General report, Inspector General Horowitz, about the now debunked Steele dossier, which supposedly was a basis upon which the FBI opened their investigation. So what we're talking about is people in positions of trust and confidence in the U.S. government abusing their power, lying to the FBI, lying to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court in order to pursue a partisan political objective. Now, I have no idea what Mr. Olson would do, but I don't think we can take any risks. Given the fact he has now turned into a partisan warrior, we've got ample examples of people who perhaps against their better judgment have thrown in to this resistance attitude and simply forgotten their professional responsibilities. And when it comes to the intelligence community and national security, we don't need any more partisan warriors in these positions of trust. These should be nonpartisan professionals. So I don't think Mr. Olson has certainly satisfied me or many of my other colleagues that he can flip that partisan warrior switch off. And for that reason, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, I just want to make a couple of quick comments in response to my friend from Texas. And
The senator from Virginia.
we have worked on a number of important items. I'm going to continue to work on a number of important items. But I think it is curious that he's citing a couple lawyers who are at the front end of the legal process that have either been arrested or have not gotten through the whole judicial process yet. I don't have the whole list in front of me, but I'd be happy to present for the record the list of individuals affiliated with the Trump campaign who've been arrested and convicted and pled guilty because of lying to the FBI or involvement with Russia. I think our investigation, of which I'm quite proud, bipartisan, successful, clearly showed Russian interference in the 2016 elections. We've seen the results of the Mueller investigation. I can't recall the exact number of convictions that arose out of that. And I agree with my friend, the senator from Texas, that we don't want, the last thing I want is any more partisanship, particularly in the intelligence community. And that's why I just, again, want to cite for the record the individuals, yes, Mr. Olson joined a lot of intelligence professionals in raising concerns about the way the previous administration ran the intelligence community. Frankly, I think they ran it in many ways disrespectful to the folks who worked in that community. But again, talking about Matt Olson's, his career, I've got a letter here that's got literally hundreds of intelligence and DOJ professionals who support Mr. Olson. Let me just cite a couple of them, all of them individuals, by the way, who have served Republican presidents. Michael Chertoff, as we all know, Assistant Attorney General, also then subsequently head of DHS. Zach Terwilliger, United States Attorney for Eastern District of Virginia, served under President Trump. Kenneth Weinstein, United States U.S. Attorney for District of Columbia, 2004 to 2006 under President Bush. Charles Rosenberg served under President Bush in the Southern District and the Eastern District. Paul McNulty, again, served under President Bush, Eastern District of Virginia, U.S. Attorney. Michael Mukasey, Attorney General under President Bush. Jesse Liu, U.S. Attorney under President Trump in the District of Columbia. The list goes on and on. All I'm hoping is that we would get a chance to debate Mr. Olson's qualifications and bring it to the floor for a vote. Instead, we've got a whole clump of individuals that have been put on a hold, a process that 99.9% of Americans don't understand. And I think Mr. Olson's career and his service to our country deserves a free and fulsome debate. Those individuals who don't want to vote for him, have at it. But we're not getting that opportunity because, and it's not my friend from Texas, let me be clear. He is not the person who placed holds. That process is taking place, and unfortunately, I believe Mr. Olson is not going to have his, not even his day in court, but his day on the floor of the Senate, which I think his service to our country he merits and deserves.
If the Senator will yield for a question.
Of course.
The chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, we have joint committee jurisdiction between Intelligence and the Judiciary Committee in dealing with this nomination. This is an extraordinary individual. And I have to raise the most basic question, and that is, at this moment in history, is this the right moment to leave this spot vacant, to not have someone in leadership, a gentleman whom you noted has a bipartisan support for his intelligence credentials? A couple names, you mentioned quite a few names, a couple names of those supporting him that you did not mention: former NSA Director General Keith Alexander, former Director of National Intelligence Mike McConnell, Senator Saxby Chambliss, our friend, former colleague, who served on the Intelligence Committee as a vice chair, all in support of Mr. Olson's nomination. And I would say at this moment in history, without going into any graphic detail or classified information, but to have this kind of vacancy in this spot, do you believe this has an impact on our security as a nation?
I'd say the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, we all reflected recently where we were 20 years ago on 9/11. But one of the astounding things that came out of the report after 9/11 was that at that moment, on 9/11 in 2001, 57% of the senior officials in the intelligence community had not been confirmed. Those positions weren't filled. The amazing thing is, 20 years later, 74% of those top positions are not filled. I think that is a disservice to the memory of those who perished on 9/11. And I think it is unfortunate, to say the least. If members have, in good faith, concerns with Mr. Olson, let's debate and have at it. But the idea of a large block of intelligence and law enforcement professionals, and we need this position at the Justice Department, sitting unfilled because an individual member on an issue not related to their qualifications has put a blanket hold on a series of members, a series of this president's nominees, does not make our nation safer.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, what I was referring to earlier are examples of abuse of power by people in the United States government who are in a position to do things to average citizens that, frankly, if they can do them to powerful individuals like candidates for president or sitting office holders, what's the little guy supposed to do? If people are so blinded by their partisanship or their desire to get somebody that they violate their oath, they violate the law, and abuse power, what's the average man and woman supposed to do? You know, it reminds me a little bit of the hearing that we had just a couple of days ago in the Judiciary Committee, where this monster named Larry Nassar, an Olympic physician for 18 years, systematically and routinely sexually assaulted and abused young female Olympic athletes. And for years, these Olympic athletes tried to get the FBI to investigate their allegations against Dr. Nassar. And it took an extended period of time, I think it was a year and a half, before the FBI actually undertook the investigation. But it took a couple of our colleagues, people like Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut, Senator Jerry Moran from Kansas, in order to stay on this issue until finally this monster, Dr. Nassar, was charged with crimes and convicted, and now is going to serve in prison the rest of his life. But it haunts me to think, if these elite Olympic athletes whose names are known all around the world could not get the government to respond to their assaults and to do them justice, what chance do the rest of us have? I'm not worried about members of Congress. I'm worried about my 29 million constituents. And so the examples I gave of Mr. Kleinsmith, who lied to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court in order to get a warrant to illegally surveil an American citizen, that's an abuse of power that causes me very grave concern. And when I read the indictment of Michael Sussman, lying to the FBI about his connection to the Clinton campaign while he compiled information that was confidential, gave it to the FBI, claimed to just be a good citizen and not representing any client, when in fact he was on the payroll of the Clinton campaign. And he was systematically leaking this information to the press to feed this narrative about Russian collusion, which has obsessed Congress and the country for years. And now we know there is no factual basis for the allegations against then candidate Trump or then later President Trump. The Russian collusion narrative was not true, but it was fed by partisans who abused their power in order to gain politically. So I don't know Mr. Olson that well. Like I said, I know he has had a distinguished career, but something clearly snapped when he became a partisan warrior. And I simply do not have confidence that he will not abuse his power in pursuit of his partisan aims. There are better people that the president could nominate to serve in this sensitive position. And I will not, in good conscience, agree to simply allow somebody with this sort of track record to be confirmed. And as my colleagues know, the majority leader has all the tools he needs at his disposal to have a vote on the Senate floor on this nomination. But it shouldn't be done by unanimous consent. It shouldn't be done outside of the public attention because there's so many things competing for people's attention. I think this is a debate and a conversation we need to have about powerful public officials abusing their power for partisan political gain. What chance does the average American have if they will use that power, abuse that power to go after powerful public figures like a candidate for president or an incumbent president of the United States? Mr. President, I'll turn to another topic. Mr. President, I'd ask consent to complete my remarks before the vote.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, our friends across the aisle are moving full steam ahead with what I think is fairly described as a reckless tax and spending spree, which is chock full of unnecessary, unwarranted, and flat-out unaffordable policies. Remember that we had to spend a lot of money, borrowed money, during the COVID crisis, which we did on a bipartisan basis because it was a national, indeed an international and global emergency. But as we continue to get people vaccinated and put the pandemic in the rearview mirror, our colleagues simply want to continue spending money that we don't have to pursue their ideological and political agenda, to grow the government, to intrude more in people's lives, and to take more of what they earn rather than let them spend it as they see fit. Our colleagues want to impose crippling tax hikes on job creators at the time when many of them are still digging out of the recession that was part of the pandemic. They want to dole out permanent welfare without requiring able-bodied men and women to work. They want to discourage medical innovation through price fixing and implement a range of items from their far-left wish list. After charging nearly $2 trillion on the taxpayer's credit card earlier this year, our Democratic colleagues are back at it for round two. And this time they're going all out. That's especially true when it comes to the energy sector. Over the past few years, we've seen no shortage of unrealistic and downright harmful policies to reduce carbon emissions. Now, there's a smart way to do it, and there's a self-defeating way to reduce emissions. One is to reduce the use of coal and increase the use of things like natural gas, which has much lower carbon content than coal. And we're doing that, and we've reduced emissions as a result. But our colleagues have proposed everything from the socialist paradise that is the Green New Deal to more targeted, but no more realistic net zero emission bills. The reckless tax and spending spree complies tax and spending spree compiles the most outlandish proposals into one of the greatest hits album. The hallmark of this legislation is a full range of tax increases on the fossil fuel industry, which ultimately are passed along to consumers and contribute to inflation and the increased costs that they have to pay in order to fill up at the pump. Whether we're talking about energy, agriculture, or any other industry, higher taxes always mean higher prices for consumers. It's inevitable. Businesses can't just take the increases as a hit to their bottom line. They might raise prices, lay off employees, postpone expansion plans, or implement all the above. But that's exactly what this proposal would spur when it comes to the energy sector. It increases taxes already paid by energy companies on income earned in the global marketplace and subjects energy employers to double taxation of their foreign income. It also adds a brand new tax, the Superfund excise tax, which was eliminated 25 years ago, all in pursuit of more revenue to grow the size of the government. Our friends across the aisle want to resurrect this tax and force energy companies to pay more on every barrel of crude oil that's sold. Once again, the ultimate burden won't be on those companies. It'll fall to consumers who are already struggling to keep up with inflation. Gasoline prices are up 42% over last year. Natural gas is up 21%. Families in Texas are paying more on everything from electricity to groceries to vehicles. This smorgasbord of higher taxes will only drive up costs for working families and hurt the very job creators we've been trying to help over the last year and a half dig out from under COVID-19. You have to wonder if these policies are going to hurt working Americans and the economy, who benefits? Well, for starters, our geopolitical adversaries will benefit. The higher cost of domestic crude would once again make the U.S. reliant on imports of oil and gas from overseas, from countries like Russia and Saudi Arabia, Iran, Venezuela, perhaps. President Biden unintentionally demonstrated the hypocrisy of this approach when he pushed earlier this year to beg OPEC, the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Companies, to increase production overseas to bring down oil prices here in the United States. In other words, he doesn't want American oil and gas producers to produce oil and gas. He wants the Russians and the Saudis to do it to help us bring down prices here in America. It's just crazy. Makes no sense. If the president was worried about affordable energy, he needs to quit pushing policies that will drive up the cost for consumers at the pump. Other big winners include wealthy electric vehicle drivers. The sort of subsidies that are contained in this proposed package includes a tax credit for electric vehicle purchases, even if these cars are made in, you guessed it, in China. And it's subsidizing, it's taking middle-income taxpayers' money and giving it to people who are buying expensive cars because they're incentivized by the tax credit. Meanwhile, we have 280 million cars on the road in America that still depend on oil and gas in order to function because they have, yes, an internal combustion engine. On top of that, a bigger tax credit is given to electric cars built in union shops. Now, why would you favor a political supporter like organized labor? Well, I think the answer may be pretty obvious. Maybe union-built electric vehicles are more green than other electric vehicles, or maybe it's a favor doled out to a special interest group by my friends on the other side to a political constituency. As a reminder, unlike gas-powered vehicle drivers, EV drivers don't even pay anything for the highways that they drive their car on. They don't pay into the Highway Trust Fund, which comes out of a cost of a gallon of gas to help maintain our roads and bridges. So our friends across the aisle just keep on coming with tax breaks for the well-off and the well-to-do in a way that will burden hardworking Texans and Americans. I support efforts to reduce carbon emissions, to preserve our air, land, and water for future generations. But these efforts shouldn't pick winners and losers, especially when wealthy Americans are reaping the benefits at the cost of blue-collar workers. Like the rest of the reckless tax and spending spree proposal, the cost of this energy proposal far exceeds any benefit It will drive up costs for American families, hurt our global competitiveness, ultimately hurt our allies that depend on exported LNG to provide energy diversity, and it will empower our adversaries. So there's no reason to stick taxpayers with the bill for these unnecessary policies when there are better ways to keep costs for consumers low while protecting our environment.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I yield back our remaining time.
All time has expired. The question is on the motion.
As for the yeas and nays,
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be a sufficient second. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mr. Braun, Mr. Brown, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn,